So today I've prepared a little video about neck tension or overuse of these very superior neck muscles here. We're going to look at a way of controlling and activating the deep cervical neck flexors and how this can help us in exercises with spinal flexion, particularly those in supine when we're looking at abdominal work, curling the back of the head from the mat. So we're going to use a little bit of some equipment today to help us achieve a little bit more of a mindfulness connection and some activation exercises that will lead us into flexion of the spine, particularly in, say, ab curl 1, hundreds prep, and so on. So we're going to take a supine position. On my mat, I've rolled up a towel, tied it with some elastic, and that's going to work as a bolster, just to support the natural arch in my cervical spine and to take pressure off of that area. As well as that, I've got a resistance band, but you can substitute it for a towel, laying long ways along my mat. I've also got an additional pillow here, which you might need just to take some extra pressure off of the cervical spine, the neck, and to lift the head slightly into a lifted position. Have this close at hand, and if you need it, by all means, add it in here. So once you've got your props, you're going to lay yourself down. Now the band itself needs to be laying along the spine and in contact with at least the shoulders so that we can anchor it into the mat to use it effectively. When we lay ourselves down, make sure you position the towel so you're really situating the neck joint itself into this nice soft cushioned area. If you feel like your head is leaning too far back and you're already getting a little sensation of straining through the neck, by all means, add this little bolster or pillow of additional support to lift the head. And now you can already see that my head is gently floating from the mat. This might support you to bring you more into a nice neutral alignment through this neck and upper back. Once you're in this position, we're not going to be lifting the head yet, so I don't want you to think about that. What I do want you to think about is locating the deep cervical flexors rather than using these sternocleidomastoids, which are on the side of the neck and run down to meet the clavicle or the collarbone. So what I do want you to think about is how we activate here. You know that you breathe into your lungs and in a nice neutral spine and pelvis setting. But how do we activate the cervical flexors without overemphasizing the sternocleidomastoid? Very simply, relax your weight onto the head, onto the mat. And I do want you to tell yourself, my head is relaxed, my neck is soft. Keep telling yourself this so that we allow the body to consciously release from these very tight muscles or these very supportive but protective muscles. You can have your hands either side of your neck if you choose, or just resting by your side or on your T-zone. We're going to take a nice soft breath in through the lungs, expanding laterally out through the rib cage. As we exhale, sink the ribs down towards the hip bones. And do that a few times for me, consciously telling yourself, my head is relaxed on the mat, my neck is soft. Breathing in, out through the in through the lungs laterally, and exhaling, ribs to hips. Nice and simple, just focusing on the body. Now when it gets to actually preparing the body to do some lifting, we need to think about this little chin tuck without overflaring the neck, and this is where you might be giving yourself a little bit too much emphasis on these very strong sternocleidomastoid muscles. To effectively work the deep neck flexors, we need to think about the positioning of the head. So on the mat here with your gentle inward and outward breath, I want you to now think about a gentle press of the back of the skull into your pillow or the mat, just a small amount. Now check that you haven't switched on these sternocleidomastoids. They should feel nice and soft. A gentle press of the skull backwards. Now think about lengthening the back of your neck here as if you were trying to just grow that cervical spine an extra millimeter or 2 in length. Check again that the sternocleidomastoid is off. You should now feel like you've got a little positioning of a chin tuck. Your chin and your sternum are slightly closer together, and if you feel the activation just behind the voice box in the deep medial center of the throat, that's your deep cervical flexors. To switch it off, relax the weight of the skull. Remember, tell yourself, my neck is soft, and allow it to switch off. I want you to practice that exercise before we move on to the next one. Now, once we've got some control over the chin tuck position without overemphasizing this sternocleidomastoid, and it's very important that you get that awareness here, we're now going to add some rib to hip connection or some oblique activation. Again, start with a nice neutral pelvis and spine setting. Relax the weight of the shoulders. Tell yourself, my head is relaxed on the mat, my neck is soft. Go to your pelvic floor and T-zone activation here, and make sure we have a small amount of recruitment on to support this neutral spine setting. Now go to your deep cervical flexor activation. Take your soft breath in. On your deep exhale, think about that gentle press of the skull back towards the mat, and think about that lengthening of the back of your neck just to grow that cervical spine an extra millimeter or two. Check again that you're not flaring these sternocleidomastoids. You have the activation that feels deeply rooted behind your voice box in that medial section of the throat. Once we've got this connection, you're going to take a lovely deep breath in, holding this activation and T-zone. And on the exhale, even placing your hands on your ribs if you'd like, we're going to exhale, bring the ribs in together and down towards the hips. Check that you're not flaring the sternocleidomastoid. You should feel that your rib to hip connection at the front line of the body has your obliques switched on. Have a soft breath in, inhaling laterally through the lungs. Keep this workload going. A gentle press the head towards the mat. Think about lengthening the cervical spine. On the exhale, the ribs come in together and down towards the hip bones. Keep your mind on not flaring that sternocleidomastoid, but keeping that activation on through the deep cervical flexors. You should feel between your rib and your hip where there are no bones, at the front line of the body, you have some obliques on. Dig your fingers in underneath the rib cage. Do this a few times, making sure that we're preparing the body for flexion, but we're not taking the head off the mat yet. Your head stays down and you keep telling yourself, my head is resting on the mat. I'm not over-flaring the sternocleidomastoid. In fact, I'm thinking about that gentle press of the head back and that lengthening of the cervical spine. Good. Add the oblique activation. Practice this a few times before you move to the next exercise. Now, step 3 in this progression is taking your hands by your sides and lengthening them on the mat. We're not going to take the head or the shoulders from the mat yet, but I do want you to find a little bit more flexion through the spine, but you can be in the safety of staying in neutral and on the mat. Have your hands by your sides, neutral spine, neutral pelvis, and come back to your T-zone connection. You're going to add that deep cervical neck flexor activation too, and you can constantly check, just with your fingers along the sides of your neck, that you're not flaring those sternocleidomastoids. Once you're prepared, pressing the back of the skull back, gently lengthening the back of the cervical spine, keeping the sternocleidomastoid off, the T-zone working, you're going to take your soft breath in. Think about keeping that length in the back of your neck. Now, as we exhale, the ribs come in and down, just like you previously practiced. But I now want you to walk your fingers down the mat and reach on that exhale too. You should feel that your oblique connection is a little bit greater now, and you may find that your chin tuck is a little bit stronger, i.e. your deep neck flexors may feel like they're working a little bit harder now. As you inhale, we're going to let the fingertips shrink back up towards the hips, and you may feel that your lungs expand laterally and that you lose that drawdown of rib to hip ever so slightly. We're not negating out of neutral spine. We're going to work at this level until we can control the oblique connection and the reach of arms down the mat without over-flaring and tensing the neck or the jaw muscles. You can practice this until you've got that under control. Remember, you can use your hands to really palpate these muscles. It's a gentle exhale to control the ribs coming in and down as we walk the fingertips down the mat, lengthening by your side. If you need, have a gentle pause here and inhale. Let the fingertips shrink back up towards the hip bones. Remember, you've got that gentle press of the back of the head towards the mat, that little lengthening of the cervical spine that promotes that chin tuck position without over-flaring the neck. Once you've mastered this, we'll move to the next progression. Now, once we have this under control, we then might add in more of a hundreds prep reach with the arms. Taking the arms over the chest can help you work that reach a little bit further. We're still not taking the head or the shoulders off the mat yet. I don't want you to move into flexion of the spine and lift and load this neck if you don't have it under control. So try this step next. Again, you're preparing your T-zone in neutral spine and pelvis. Drop the shoulders from the ears. Think about pressing the back of the head back and lengthening that cervical spine. Again, we want deep neck flexors without sternocleidomastoid overtaking this activation. Just like you did previously, take your breath in for preparation. Think about the exhale here. Now, as we exhale, we're going to sink the ribs in and down towards the hip bones. As we start to scoop the T-zone, reach the hands down past your hips, lengthening them and floating them from the mat. Check if you'd like with one arm that you're not over-tensing the sternocleidomastoid. We should still be able to breathe quite fluidly. Inhale, fingertips back over chest. Good. Tell yourself, my head is on the mat, my neck is not over-tensing. I've got the sensation of my deep neck flexors on, and I've got that lengthening of cervical spine without over-tensing and dropping too far down into this really tight position of the neck. It's a really gentle chin tuck. So again, setting yourself up, find the deep cervical flexor activation, keep the sternocleidomastoid off each side of the neck nice and soft. On an exhale, as the ribs sink in and down, we're scooping the T-zone, reaching the hands past the hip bones. We want obliques on. We don't want to move away from neutral spine, but we do want to feel like we're promoting a small range of flexion without over-flaring. Inhale, hands over chest. And you can repeat this a few times until you've practiced this level of activation, staying head down on the mat, but now working deeper through that flexion line. Once you've mastered all of those progressions, you can then look at small ranges of a supported ab curl exercise. I'm going to use a resistance band, but you might use a wider towel depending on your hand and arm placement. You can still use your neck pillow and your head pillow if it suits you as well. That might help with the alignment of that nice cervical spine. I'm going to show you without so that you can see the equipment in its full use. I'm going to come back to supine, lying on my back with bent knees. I want to make sure that my shoulders are anchoring the band into the mat and the head is resting centrally over the band. From here, I'm going to take hold of the band overhead between my thumb and index finger with each corner of the band. You can scrunch up your fingers if you need, and I do want you to think about drawing the elbow gently forwards, making almost a 90-degree angle over the shoulder. Again, if this promotes you to arch your upper back or create tension in your neck, you might take a towel, making a wider position with your arms, and that might help you support more of a neutral spine. We do want T-zone working in this exercise, and we do want a neutral lower back and pelvis. Once I've gathered up some resistance on the band so that I know I'm not going to be working against any slack, and this equipment's going to fully support the weight of my skull, I'm going to come back to my deep cervical neck flexor activation. T-zone is on, and again I've pushed my head gently back into the mat and thought about that lengthening of cervical spine here. I'm going to tell myself that my head is resting on the band at all times, and it's going to support the weight of my skull. Take a deep breath in here. Now don't tense your neck. It's very common that you're preparing for movement, and that preparation psychologically will cause you to tense that sternocleidomastoid. Instead, as we exhale, drawing the ribs in and down, come back to the previous exercises where you just worked that lovely oblique connection. Now as we do so, we're going to pull on the resistance of the band as if it were a sling, exhaling ribs towards hips to scoop the T-zone flat. I'm coming into a small range of a head float, and again I'm looking not to overemphasize that sternocleidomastoid, so I'm not going too high yet. Keep the range nice and small. Inhale, bring the head back down. Again, we'll do that together. Think about pressing the head back into the band, lengthening that cervical spine just ever so slightly to create deep cervical neck flexor activation. Take a deep breath in. On an exhale, drawing the ribs in and down towards the hips, scooping the T-zone, pull on the ends of the band. Think about drawing your elbows forwards. And as we exhale, we might have a little head float. Just a small range. Then inhale, bring the head back down. Obviously, as we work through this exercise, we may find that we can take larger ranges of movement, which will prepare you for your full range of ab curl 1. We don't want to disturb this lumbar spine from its neutral position, but we also want to think about not compensating through straining this neck joint. Eventually, you might build up enough of a conscious mindfulness of what you're activating to the point where you may exhale to curl, come into a deeper range of your ab curl 1, very similar to the mat work exercise you would have previously done. Always work within your ranges, and this might be something that you might practice throughout your weeks just to help you with any tension through the neck. As we move on, you may find that the band becomes more redundant and you work instead through your ab curl position, but again through the small range, working through that deep neck cervical flexor activation and abdominals, as well as that oblique line of ribs drawing towards hips. You may find that the head just minorly floats. If you've got a pillow underneath that head, that can be a good way of you working into a range slowly. You could start with a higher pillow and just think about floating the weight of the skull just lightly on the surface of your pillow or towel. So here I've got my deep neck cervical flexor on, I've got my T-zone working, and as I exhale, I've just got a small lift, only so much that I can feel that I am loading the cervical spine, but not overloading. You can work through your ranges in this exercise, gradually taking the pillow or the support that you have, gradually into a smaller support pillow, and then taking it away. Have a go with these exercises and see how you get on. Hopefully this helps you prepare this neck joint for loading without overstimulating. So one last thing to think about is possibly your eye line, or where you're looking in view to the movement that you're practicing. So in flexion, when we're laying in supine, if you are looking up towards the ceiling, you're going to direct your chin upwards. You'll be stretching, open the front of this neck, and you'll lose that lovely minor chin tuck position that we've talked about when we looked at deep cervical neck flexor activation. Primarily, I want you to think about looking down towards your knees, looking down the tip of your nose as it was. So when you are laying on your back, you're already thinking about letting your eye line shift towards your knees, i.e. when you come into ab curl position with this deep exhale, coming into spinal flexion, you do want to make sure that you are looking at the knee line here. As you come higher, you might shift your eye line to look at flat abdominals, but we're not craning the chin to the chest, because this is going to create a lot of tension back in those sternocleidomastoid. So have a little play with your eye line. That may also help you direct the attention off of the sternocleidomastoid and back to the abdominals and these deep neck cervical flexors.